I honestly have had a hard time getting into most RPGs. The only games I have ever really completed in the genre are Nintendo games such as Pokemon and Mario and Luigi. This may just be childhood nostalgia, or maybe I just really like the time-based battles of Mario and Luigi. Either way, they're the only ones to really hook me. But, over the winter of 2020, one of my close personal friends recommended me Ikenfell. I originally didn't think much of the game, assuming it to just be another pretty alright indie gem I'd never heard of. I have never been so thankful to be wrong before. The story of Ikenfell revolves around Marit. Her sister, Safina, has disappeared and she was last seen at Ikenfell, a magical school for learning witches. While traveling through the woods, it is revealed that the School of Magic has been locked down and her status as an ordinary, or a non-magic human, prevents her access. After a brief losing battle with three ghostly figures, she is able to awaken the fire magic within her and she is promptly granted access as the quest begins. Most of the story progresses at a natural speed and consists of 8 main chapters. We are introduced to many different students and teachers with connections to Safina. Some of these students, such as Petronella or Rook, become party members that help you unravel the mystery of her disappearance. Along with in-game dialogue, the appearance of memory crystals also helps to fill in the gaps of information that in most games would just be heavy exposition. The game mostly involves exploring different areas in or around Ikenfell to help unravel the mysteries. While that may sound like a rather restrictive map compared to some RPGs, the game manages to make the areas feel much larger and more alive than they actually are despite the small size. Large portions of the game are spent exploring with many character conversations sprinkled throughout. Almost every character in this game is very distinct, and through the amazing 16-bit artwork in these conversations, it's never really hard to tell who's talking or how they feel about a current situation. I often found conversations between 6 party members to never feel overwhelming despite how easy it would be for the dialogue to be bloated and the characters to be lost in the conversation. Overall, the characters and story of this game are pretty good. While there is much more to this game, most information past Chapter 2 is a spoiler, and it's just much better if you experience the game yourself. Ah yes, the meat and potatoes of any game, its gameplay. The gameplay of Ikenfell is split between 2 main sections, world exploration and enemy/boss encounters. First, I'll cover the exploration. The world exploration mostly revolves around walking through areas, often finding enemies and completing simple puzzles to progress further. While the areas never step their toe into anything too crazy design or puzzle-wise, most areas in the game, like the Astronomy Tower or the Alchemy Lab, are distinct enough design-wise, but I will admit that there are some areas that kind of fail to appear distinct from one another. The game frequently does a good job letting the player know what they need to do next, whether it be through character dialogue, the pause screen having a useful message or tip, or even the map having a pointer over the next area. Ikenfell is never a game I ever had to pull up a video to find out where I needed to go next, which is more than I can say for a lot of RPGs. The other half of the game, the combat, is by far my favorite of the 2 halves. While I found exploring and character interactions to be fun but sometimes too simple, I loved the tile-based battles and found them to be way more interesting. The battles revolve around 3 of your 6 chosen party members fighting in a 3x12 grid with enemies. While the small size originally had me worried the battlefield would feel too chock full of enemies, it never felt too cramped or restricted. The battle system of Ikenfell is turn-based, revolving around positioning and the timing of attacks. Different characters and their spells have different attack areas, so creating a good formation is crucial to success in these battles. One feature of the game I absolutely adore is the timing-based aspect. Based on how well a player times an input at the moment of strikes, they will find themselves doing much more damage. The same also applies to receiving hits as well, with better timed inputs cutting damage by large amounts. The enemies in the game all had distinct designs, and I never found their attacks too similar, meaning learning their distinct block timings was crucial to winning later battles and quite enjoyable to master. The game also has a pretty solid difficulty curve. Early on, the punishment for mistimes are minimal, and battles never really seem to halter you too much, but later in the game, if your timing's not on point, some bosses can destroy your health in 2 to 3 hits. There was never really a time in the game where the health or damage of enemy and bosses felt too off. It was almost always fun to fight them, and it felt like it was fair at the same time. Another small bonus is just how well the game lets you customize the experience. If you care exclusively for the story, there's auto-win options for those who just dislike grinding or simply don't want to deal with some bosses. There is also the option to set the game to be like other RPGs with automatic nice/greats on attacks/blocks. While I personally never used any of the features, I appreciate the inclusion for those who are not very good at RPGs. One of my favorite things about this game is just how different all the characters feel in battle, and I love how each had a distinct role that the others couldn't really fill. First you have Marit, the first member of your journey, serving as your main damage dealer. Most of her moves revolve around hitting large areas and doing moderate to high amounts of damage. She is also the only character in the game able to buff the damage of herself or teammates through encouraging them or enchanting tiles with damage buffs. I often used her throughout the whole game, mostly just due to how consistent she was to use in battle. Petronella, the second addition to your party, they serve as the much needed support early in the game. Most of their spells don't really do a large amount of damage, with a larger emphasis on healing teammates and poisoning enemies. While strong healing wise, their low damage and lack of self-heal options for the first half of the game made using them sometimes feel inconsistent. Rook, the third addition to your team and by far the weakest of the six. They have a bit going for them with their high damage, but a majority of their moves I just found too situational to use them throughout the entire game. For example, they have a move that does more damage to humans, that really only applies to a few bosses, and even then there weren't that many situations throughout the game to use it. I won't deny that they have tile traps and some pretty decent attacking moves, but at the end of the day I just found them immediately replaceable by the fourth member that you find in the story. Up next is the fourth member of your team, Pertisia, and definitely by far the most offensive of the 6 party members. She has some pretty good damaging attacks with amazing buff/debuff potential. As the only character in the game that can raise team defense and lower enemy defense, she has a niche that others just can't fill. Her damage and attacks aren't anything to scoff at either, with moves like Levitate and Surge able to do large amounts of damage. The only reason I didn't really use her too much was just that if you can hit consistently great blocks, then the defense spell isn't too necessary. The fifth member, Ima, Zay are definitely the most unique of the cast. While Zay don't have a defined role, Zay can accomplish many different things through a wide range of spells. Zay can do healing through Rainbow and Pigment, grid control through Sentinel and Puppet, and damage through Blade and Arrow Storm. One of my favorites to use, Zay is just always able to find a useful spell in a current situation, making Zer one of the best in my opinion. The final member, Gilda. Ah yes, the best girl, But seriously, the final addition to your team, Gilda is by far the most fun to use of the 6. The name of her game is Speed, and all of her moves are fast and have their uses. She is by far the most mobile of the group and holds the ability to teleport, giving her almost full grid control. She also holds the exclusive ability to give speed buffs to the team. While her damage is not quite as high as Marit's or Rook's, her moves have much larger hit zones, allowing her to be able to attack much more often than these two. Overall, I enjoyed all 6 of the distinct characters and found almost every encounter in the game to be unique and have some kind of fun aspect to it. Now on to what is my personal favorite thing about the game, the music. You've been hearing it throughout the entire video. The music of this game is outstanding and manages to fit every single area a theme is played. The game manages to switch between a chippy soundtrack and a strong lyrical track without really feeling that out of place. The music from Ivy and Sarashu, formerly of the Steven Universe team, is apparent. The mix of piano and electronic music creates beautiful themes throughout the entire game. I rarely find a game with this many consistently great tracks. My personal favorite of the bunch are definitely the vocal tracks, but some of my personal favorite non-vocal tracks are Lullaby for a Witch, Toil in Trouble, and Memories in the Mist. I would recommend you give them a listen. I'm not really much of a music nut, so I can't really go into detail about specific tracks and techniques used, but if there's one thing I can say about this game, it's that it has my favorite video game soundtrack of all time, and I highly recommend anyone give it a listen if they're not sold. While I love this game to bits, I cannot say it is perfect. For one, some of the areas feel very similar. The study hall, the archives, and the stacks all have very similar designs, and I often dreaded coming back to these areas on repeat playthroughs due to them not really introducing anything new. I also rather dislike that the plot admittedly takes a while to get going. You pretty much have to wait till chapter 5 to get a substantial amount of lore, which, considering at that point you're over halfway done, it feels a little late for my taste to get the ball rolling plot-wise. This last complaint's also a bit more subjective, but I just found some bosses a pain to fight in this game. Most bosses were quite fun to fight, but some just spawn in far too many enemies with way too much health. These battles often slow down to a crawl, waiting for these low damage enemies to attack before you can act again. So, final verdict, is the game worth it? I personally say yes. While Ikenfell is not perfect, I still consider this to be one of my personal favorites of all time. The small plot issues and the few annoying bosses can't bog down my favorite soundtrack, or most of the battles being quite fun and simple while still having some complexity to them. I had never played a tile RPG up until Ikenfell, and I found it a great introduction. The timing-based attacks are similar to another one of my favorites, the Mario and Luigi series, so it does a great job of making the battles feel involved. And for those curious, I noticed no major performance issues on the Switch, so I can confidently recommend any version of the game to buy. I personally would recommend this game to anyone who wants a good story with great character interactions and music. The combat is fun and no area of the game falls short in my opinion. I would give it an outstanding 9 out of 10.